Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Stephany Lapiere. Stephany is a founder and CEO at TealBook, which is a company that provides most comprehensive supplier intelligence using AI and machine learning. Stephany has been recognized as one of the top 100 most influential women in supply chain, and her company, TealBook, has both been named as a top 50 company to watch by Spend Matters and won the Cool Vendor Award by Gartner. So, Stephany, thank you for joining our Risk Management Show podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Stephany, let's start with a simple question. Could you tell us a short story about yourself, your career path, what brought you to where you are right now, and what you guys at TealBook are up to these days?
Yeah, I mean, how much time do we have? Just kidding. Maybe high level, I am originally from Quebec, French speaking, and it's my last name, Lapiere. And I've always been surrounded by entrepreneurs. So I think in my DNA, I've always known that I want to start my own business. I went to university in English. I got to learn English and get the opportunity very early on to join a startup. And so I got to see, what it takes to build a company, the energy that it creates. That was really fun. And then I went and worked. I had a few corporate jobs. I worked in a pharmaceutical company, and then I worked for a data company that was selling prescription data to pharmaceutical companies. So that was my first exposure to the value of data, that highly proprietary data, to an enterprise. I had the fortitude to start a company. My first company, the startup that I worked for, hired me back a few years later to launch their US division. And so I moved to Boston, and I was there for a few years building this company. And so, and I was selling to pharmaceutical company a service. And through that experience, what I saw is that innovation was really important to our customers, and they're always looking for innovation and spending a lot of time meeting with suppliers to understand what was being done, because suppliers were such a good source, of market research, because they're trying to solve similar problems for other companies. And I found that there was a lot of time being spent with suppliers, but it was hard to find what was truly innovative or not. And a lot of time was wasted. And so in 2006, I started a company called Matchbook. And the premise of that business was to help large pharmaceutical companies find innovation across all function. And so for about 9 years or so, I built this company, consulting services. I didn't raise capital. I got one customer, made money, reinvested in the business. And what I saw is that there was a lot of similarities between the process of finding innovation to what our customers were starting to look at, strategic sourcing and procurement. And strategic sourcing being at the time fairly new, spin-off of procurement, to add more strategic value to the business. And so our customers, who were at the time large pharmaceutical companies, start asking, is there a way to learn from that process and help us build a more strategic sourcing function that aligns with the needs of the business? And so that's how my consulting firm started to evolve. And at one point, a lot of my contacts went to smaller biotech companies that were growing really fast. And that gave me a lens into how could we build this procurement function in a way that could be more transparent, scalable, and enabling, because they were growing so fast. It was not so much about cost saving, it was about speed and transparency and mitigating risk. And so with that lens, that consulting business really started focusing on helping these biotech companies build what I call a better best-in-class procurement function. And it's through all those experiences that what I saw in the ability for a procurement function, or any function that oversees third-party providers, is that in order to collect information and have visibility, which is so important to risk, you need good information. And what I saw is that it was really hard to get good information on so many suppliers with the speed of change and what was happening, in the market, to the business. And I started seeing that the gaps in what I had seen, some of the blockers for large companies to maximize the value of procurement, was very quickly happening with small biotech companies, mostly because of data. And so I saw this as, this is not a software problem. It's not a people problem. It's not a process problem. We have a data problem. And if we could fix this data problem, it would unlock, hundreds of millions of dollars in value for organizations. And so that's, I spent 9-10 years fighting the idea of TealBook, and then decided to finally take the leap of faith about 9 years ago.
No. So you're very proficient in running startup companies, raising money, and promoting your ideas, right?
Well, so this first business was all built as a service. So what was nice is I didn't have to have a large investment up front. The first year I built the business, generated revenue, and then reinvested. And so in that business, I've never raised money, never needed to. And, that business still exists. I don't operate anymore, but 16 years old, highly specialized in building procurement for biotech companies. But with TealBook, that was different. The idea of TealBook just percolated. And I try to kill it for years, trying to figure out, like, poke holes at it. And, but every time I worked with a company, data was so bad. And it took my service company so much time just to get baseline. And then even within getting the baseline, there was a lot of holes of information. Then you had to get more information to help my customers make better decisions. And these were a sophisticated organization who had invested in the SAP, Ariba, Coupa.
Yeah.
The smaller companies were moving really fast, and they couldn't move as fast with as much information to help mitigate potential risk or make just better decisions on how to maximize their capital. And so I knew that building TealBook would be different. This would be a tech company. I knew the problem was systemic, not just in pharma biotech, but in all enterprise that had, a number of suppliers that's harder to manage. And I waited at the perfect time, maybe too early, debatably, but I waited until it was possible because, companies I've been trying to solve this problem the manual way. But once I start seeing the mass adoption of cloud technology, and I start seeing, customers, especially in this function, adopting cloud technology, I knew that was the entry point. We couldn't do it without that. And then the big thing that changed the course of TealBook is I was introduced to machine learning and AI about 8 years ago. And that blew my mind, because we could do things using technology that, there's no incentive big enough in the world to have suppliers coming to another portal to put information. And so we had to find a way to bypass sort of the, how do you sort of the cold start problem? How do you start getting information of value to the enterprise? And once I learned about AI ML that we could build on Google, on GCP, we could leverage some of their machine learning models early on and build an AI team that could be transformative. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 9 years, 7 years more actively using AI ML, is finding ways to collect information on every B2B company in the world and bring it to a digital profile that just continuously gets more coverage and also continuously gets better quality, so that our customers can really reduce all this manual, collecting information from thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of suppliers manually across disparate system. They can centralize their data, they can enrich it over time, they can have more transparency, and they can use a better record to distribute across their system. And we can talk more about how that impacts risk, but there's a huge efficiency gain. And then, the benefit of having better quality data.
All right, fantastic. So I believe that we will have a thoughtful conversation on the topic of solving the supply risk and data issues with using AI and ML. So because I know with the supply, we all know that after COVID and during the COVID, supply chain issues have been very high on the news and on agenda of major companies and also small companies. And in addition to that, risk managers are very, for risk managers, it's important to have a very robust third-party risk management system to avoid various issues like cybersecurity and threats. So I believe let's discuss first what is a supplier data problem and why is it crucial for business to address it in a new way that your company solves.
Yeah, I think if you look at status quo, like most organization right now will have multiple systems, their ERP, their source to pay, they'll have contract management system, onboarding potentially systems, and the list goes on and on. And then you have your third-party risk management system. And in traditional way, you would use those systems to collect information directly from suppliers. So that requires a supplier to come in and populate information in a portal, which is just very hard with the number of systems that, one organization has. And then when you look at the suppliers and the amount of portals they have to update, it's just not sustainable. And so you end up with a lot of gaps. And that's sort of we call the big fat lies that software will fix your data. Well, it won't, not if you depend on suppliers to come and update it. The other way, and we see a lot of third-party risk management solutions today, and they try to get to a better record of the company and they try to monitor, but most of them are highly specialized in one areas of risk. And so as a risk, if in a risk function, you often end up with multiple third-party risk management system because risk is really broad. Right? So there's a lot of elements to risk, and suddenly, you're monitoring, all these alerts and all this information, and it's very difficult to turn that into actual insight. And it also relies on you trusting that the information that you're getting is high quality and relevant. And that's just very difficult. And so one, like the managing of all the information and the systems that you have, maintaining the sheer amount of information that comes back to you, and then making sure that you have the foresight or the insight to know what is true risk for the organization. And then there's the how do you mitigate it, or how do you take action? And so I when I think of the number of systems, and if Kearney or Eloise Epstein, she publishes a spider graph of all the tech companies in this new ecosystem, and it started with a few and now it's an explosion of organization, and risk is a big component of it. So is ESG, by the way. There's now like hundreds to maybe thousands of companies that focus on ESG. So very competitive environment, lots of different ways that you could go about third-party risk. My view, and that's my biased view, is that everything you do comes back to a company. And if your information about that company is wrong or bad or incomplete, everything falls apart. And so you could have all these systems, you could have all these tools, but if the core information of the supplier for the organization is flawed or incomplete, I believe that everything will fall apart, because you need, as an organization, to understand who do you do business with at a level that you can see with all the activities across the entire life cycle, the impact of that supplier through this life cycle. And my view is that it starts with good information on the suppliers at baseline. You need to know who you do business with. And most enterprise, it's shocking how little they know about their suppliers. And they may know the top suppliers. You'll have a number that are critical to the organization. You'll know more deeply. Even that, you still have to maintain and manage information on them. And even with the large ones, it's really hard to know if there are multiple systems, how they all unify back to the same company, and what's the impact of the true spend. But when you're looking at, if you have 100,000 suppliers, like how do you know what these companies do at a scale where the majority of the risk actually happens in these small businesses? There's a small dollar spend, the accumulation of, probably tens of thousands of suppliers that are global. And if you don't know who they are, and you don't know the impact of the business, and you don't know, the trends from a spend perspective, and you don't have additional context about that company, it's very hard. Like you can have an overload of information, but you actually don't really necessarily know how to leverage it in a more effective way. And so again, my view is if you start with the company information, the supplier information, and you can unify that back to one entity of who you do business with and have as much information about that company as possible from, internally, how they're being leveraged, what you're spending money with, to who they are, what they do, what are they certified for, how do they relate to the world, what's impacting them, who's affiliate with them. There's a lot of information that you can access. Then you have a true picture of your entire supplier network, and then you can make more strategic decision on where you should get information from versus trying to overload so much or just focusing on, who you think your key suppliers are. You have the opportunity to look at your entire supplier network and have just a way to, it's not just about risk, about optimizing spend. It's also the biggest opportunities for innovation. It's also the biggest opportunities to, meet your ESG target, because the impact when you accumulate all your small suppliers can be massive. We can talk about hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's also the biggest source of risk. So, there's a lot of elements and layers to risk. And when we think about risk, it comes in so many different components, but that's how I think about it. The other piece that our customers are asking for is they don't want to score. They get a lot of scores from all, they can go to Moody's or S&P or whoever to get a risk score. They actually want the data. Like they don't want the score, they want the raw data, because they want to apply their own risk element to that supplier based on how they view risk. And that's really difficult to get. And most risk management solution, they don't give the raw data and the trust score attributed to that data. They give you that score. And I think organizations now want to get more granular, but not by adding more work. They want to get more granular in a more automated, a more enabling, a more intelligent way. And that's where AI is incredibly powerful, because it reduces all this manual collection of information. And it's more than just monitoring what's happening in the world. It's actually understanding who you do business with before you can start expanding that to more, monitoring tools across all the elements of risk, which is very overwhelming because there's a lot happening in the world.
All right.
That was a long answer, but hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah. But if we, for example, just concentrate more on the risk managers, if we take the life of risk manager or compliance manager, if there is one thing that they should start to prioritize right now that they are not doing, what would that be?
I think a baseline, like if you have visibility in your entire supplier base, there's a lot of risk and just your own network. And that's, we think of third-party risk like cybersecurity risk, which is 100% super important. But even having visibility into your suppliers, know which ones are SOC 2 certified, which one are ISO certified, like just having a baseline of who your suppliers are and who's certified and who's trusted and who has more business and maybe more higher standards within your sector. That's really good visibility. But what we often find is within our own customers, because they're either decentralized or they have multiple systems, just having a unified view of who they do business with highlights a lot of issues in their suppliers. And so, examples of that is companies that maybe have been acquired that nobody knows about. It could be also that you have duplicates of the same supplier within your system, and that's sort of highlighting, lost opportunity to optimize spend, but also some risk element. It could be like we see a lot of inappropriate, content. Like when you look at the supplier base, sometimes there's like hundreds of suppliers that when you start pulling domains and understanding who these suppliers are, you don't want that kind of information in your ERPs and your system. So there's like a baseline of like, who do you do business with? Who are these suppliers? How do you clean that data? How do you unify it? And then you can start looking at, baseline of who's ISO certified, who has SOC 2 certification, any sort of cybersecurity certification. And then you can start, as you're building your strategy for risk, then you can get deeper into more complex data set so that you can start getting, into quality, into safety, into geographical, or political risk and things like that. And then we get more into monitoring of social media, monitoring of, forecasts and things like that. And there's tools that are really good at this, but again, it should pull from the same supplier, knowing exactly the same entity, the information about that supplier to the organization, feeding into a third-party risk management system versus trying to get that information, in a niche solution, it'll be very difficult to know, at 100% of your suppliers, who does it actually impact and how does that relate to your company? And I just add that, recently I was at a conference talking to chief procurement officers, and I was asking a pretty basic question, like if your CEO came to you and asked you even a year ago, because it was in the context of war and political, risk, who are your suppliers in Russia? Like, would you be able to answer that question really fast? And they all smiled and said, no. I said, how long would it take? And the average answer was 3 days to 3 weeks, not instant, in 3 days being like, oh, you're doing really well. Because, most of them would answer 3 weeks. And then you ask, how long would it take you to give the risk profile of that supplier to the organization and find alternative suppliers, that are in different country, maybe, in North America? And they all smiled and they all said too long. Right. And that's, again, because the information about those suppliers internally is so bad that you can't even get that baseline information to be able to answer that question, or even better, being proactive and going to your CEO and say, hey, we have 3 suppliers in Russia. Here's the risk, impact to our organization. Here's some contingent suppliers that we should be looking at that are in North America, that are known to our industry, that we should start lining up to make sure that we're mitigating our risk. And today it's not possible, not at the speed that the organization needs, and not with the amount of information that you need to manage. And so again, leverage, this is a great example of using AI to improve the quality of your data, give you more transparency, and then that highlights much better trusted intelligence to enable anyone, including, someone in risk, to be able to make better, faster, more proactive decisions.
All right. So you actually provided some real world examples of companies that have some issues related to third-party risk. But I would like to ask you a personal point of view. What is the major misconception in the field of supply risks that you strongly disagree with?
I think I just said it. It's we're going to buy these third-party risk management system, and it's going to help us get smarter and faster and more agile, and and mitigate the risks. I think it's overwhelming, and there's too many things to monitor. So if you don't leverage newer technologies to do that, you're going to spend more time making the sausage and trying to make sense of what the information is versus taking the information that you need and then be able to apply it to real world decision. And it's a lot of talk about generative AI right now. It's a great opportunity to ask good questions and be able to move faster. The problem, there's 2 issues. One, if you're using something like OpenAI and you don't have a contained, secure, way to leverage data, you could actually put your organization at risk by asking the wrong question. So you want to be really, really careful. The second piece of it is if you do it on a secure cloud where it's your own data and your data's bad, then, you're not going to be able to leverage it with information that you can actually trust. And that could be really damaging for a reputation if you're highlighting information that's false, or you're not seeing something that you should know about. And so, again, my view is the big misconception is like, let's start with the external side. Like, let's buy third-party risk management solutions. Let's start getting more information on our suppliers versus start with a really strong data foundation, because then you can buy third-party risk management systems, but feed it with better data from within. And then you can start getting, validation or monitoring on the right suppliers in a way that you can leverage and trust. And so that's a big misconception in my view. And I think it's just more of a side effect of fixing data has been traditionally really, really hard to do. I'd say almost impossible to get a level of quality that's consistent. And that's now changed, but the world needs to understand why it's changed, why now, and how they can take advantage of this so that they can fix their data first, get high quality data across all their suppliers, and then start building their programs around so that they're more strategic, they're more enabling, they're more intelligent, they're more predictive.
All right, Stephany, thank you. So if we summarize this interview, if someone who is listening to it would like to walk away with 1 or 2 major takeaways, what would it be?
I'll just be careful. There's a lot of hype around AI. It's super exciting. There's no question it is transformative, but don't just buy in because it's a hype. Make sure that you have a really good strategy. It's a great opportunity, especially in risk, because there's so much information that you need to digest. But start with data, like start with really understanding your own supplier landscape. And then it's visibility also, not just on your supplier base, but the opportunity to also get better quality data on all suppliers. And so one, enriching your own supplier data, getting your baseline, that I think is the number one. And then how do you expand that supplier network so that when you're looking for contingent suppliers, and we saw a lot of those cases in COVID where suddenly you need to find alternative suppliers really fast. And so that's still, very much part of the data set. You need to access really good information on all suppliers. So, and just think data first, software after. I cannot, advocate more of this. We've seen too much failure, and, over budgets of, projects, systems, implementation that just continue to fail because the data, it depends on high quality data.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for your very insightful interview. And that were all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot to ask you something that you think that is important for our audience, please go ahead.
Well, I think it's been hard, I think, for most people in all functions, but risk specifically. There've been so much whiplash in the last 3 to 4 years. And COVID highlighted, it's not because of COVID that you need data. COVID highlighted that data is critical. And so, and I'd say the next step, and just from a career perspective, is once you have the data, then your ability to tell a story, to get the right insight and tell a story just for your own career, and also to be able to level up with what your executive team needs to know and understand and mitigate is really important. So those skill set, access to the data and the skill set to be able to tell stories are, amazing opportunities with this light world and a bit of chaos right now in Whiplash.
All right, Stephany, thank you very much again. And I wish you great success, you and you personally and your company, to grow and create this kind of a new line of business, AI and third-party risk. I think many companies will follow, so you will probably will have to take a lead and consolidate on it. But I think it's good, very, very good niche.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.